The Orphan's Dream, written by Dilly Court, read by Annie Aldington. The moral right of the author has been asserted. Chapter 1. Catherine Court, Great Tower Hill, London, 1881. The locals called the house Cutler's Castle, and it wasn't intended as a compliment. Mirabel was painfully aware of the fact that her father wasn't the most popular man in the city, having acquired his wealth by sharp trading and a ruthless desire to put his rivals out of business. Jumped-up Jacob Cutler was one of his more repeatable nicknames, and if people were polite to his face, Mirabel knew that they laughed at him behind his back. Her father's cock-of-the-walk attitude and boastful nature were unlikely to endear him to his neighbours or the other city merchants, and Mirabel had realised long ago that this was why they were shunned socially. She hitched her basket over her arm and let herself in through one of the wrought iron gates which separated the court from Seething Lane at one end and Trinity Square at the other. Their intended purpose was to keep out thieves and vagrants, but at times Mirabel felt as though they'd been designed to create a prison for the residents, herself in particular. Her weekly excursions to help at the soup kitchen were her one way of escaping from a life bounded by her father's strict rules. She headed for the house which had been her home for almost as long as she could remember. Cutler's Castle dominated the Georgian terraces in a way befitting a man of considerable means. Double-fronted, with a porch supported by ornate Corinthian columns, it satisfied Jacob's desire to show off. He employed a cook, a maid-of-all-work, and Septimus Wiley, a manservant who varied his duties between valet and butler and ruled his small empire with ruthless disregard for the feelings of others. But Wiley had a weakness. Mirabel had discovered that he was a secret drinker, imbibing his master's best brandy at every possible opportunity. How he managed to conceal his drunken state from her father she was at a loss to know. She tried to warn Jacob about his employee's shortcomings, but her father's refusal to take her seriously made her wonder if the despicable Wiley held some sway over him. He seemed to get away with behaviour that would not be tolerated in any other household, and he treated her with barely concealed contempt. Wiley, and his black tailcoat with his stick-thin arms and legs, put her in mind of a spider, spinning his web, ready to strike at any moment. She was about to knock on the door, when she saw Harriet Humble emerge from the house opposite, with her maid in tow, as well as a small boy, whose duty was to carry his mistress's purchases home at the end of her frequent shopping expeditions. Mrs. Humble's husband was a prosperous gunmaker, with premises in Thames Street, and if she chose to outrival Jacob with her spendthrift ways, he always managed to outdo her in a spectacular fashion, which was unlikely to win their friendship. The Humbles were pleasant enough, and passed the time of day with Mirabel, but had little to say on the rare occasions when she was with her father. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Humble." Mirabel nodded and smiled. "Good afternoon, Miss Cutler." Harriet acknowledged her with a pitying look and walked on, but then she paused and came to a halt, turning to stare at Mirabel with her head on one side and a calculating expression on her doughy features. "I see your father has a new companion, Miss Cutler." "I beg your pardon, Mum?" "Such a handsome woman," Harriet continued slyly. "I'm sure you must have met her on many occasions. They seem quite a devoted couple, and I've been told that it's some time since your mother passed away." "My mother died when I was 5, Mirabel said coldly. "I think you're mistaken, Mrs. Humble. My father comes in contact with many people in his business capacity." Harriet shrugged her plump shoulders. "I dare say you're right, Miss Cutler, but she is a very handsome woman, and I should think she's quite a lot younger than your father, and if she's in trade, well—" She allowed the sentence to hang like a cobweb, floating in the air. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." Mirabel raised her hand to knock on the door. "I imagine that you'll find out soon enough, Miss Cutler. Come, Mary, don't dawdle, or we'll be late." Harriet seemed determined to have the last word, and she marched off with her entourage trotting along at her heels like well-trained puppies. Mary looked back and stuck her tongue out at Mirabel, and the boy copied her.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?